Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Russia sanctions. The U.S. slaps fresh sanctions on Russia over a nerve agent attack against a former double agent living in the U.K. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
Draconian and far-fetched. We'll tell you what the Russians are saying about this latest round of sanctions.
Third earthquake breaking news for you. Another strong earthquake has hit the Indonesian island of Lombok. The tremor has caused buildings to collapse. Still ablaze, wildfires burn across Portugal's Algarve region, dangerously close to top tourist destinations as the country struggles to get them under control. Crucial vote. More breaking news. Argentina's Senate rejects a proposed bill to legalize abortion. And doctoring scores. A top Tokyo medical school admits manipulating test scores for more than a decade to ensure more men than women became doctors. Thank you for starting your morning with us. Our top story: 1 month after Donald Trump was criticized for failing to get tough on Russia in Helsinki, Washington has unleashed fresh sanctions on Moscow over the Novichok nerve agent attack in the UK. Well, the attack, which happened in March and left a former Russian spy and his daughter fighting for their lives, sparked international outrage despite Russia denying any involvement. The sanctions announced on Wednesday come after U.S. intelligence concluded that Russia was behind the poisoning. Well, joining me to tell us more is our correspondent, Alistair Sanford. So, Alistair, what do we know about these new sanctions? What have been announced?
The announcement comes from the U.S. State Department, and it finds that Moscow did use a nerve agent against the former Russian agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in England. It quotes an old law from 1991 about chemical and biological weapons, saying that the Russian government used them in violation of international law, or that it used them against its own nationals. The sanctions that are going to be put in place now, well, it's going to be things like exports of technological equipment that's sensitive to national security. It's thought that licenses for those sort of exports will be stopped. And one official says that this could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the Russian economy. There's a second batch that would be due within 90 days, unless the Russians give reliable assurances that they'll stop these sort of activities. So really this looks like it could get more serious. Why now? Because remember that in March, Russia did expel dozens of diplomats in solidarity with the UK, but it stopped short of saying that this was a violation of international law on chemical weapons. So the UK government's welcomed this move, saying this is a very strong international response against the Russians. Remember that the US already has sanctions imposed on Russia for its activities in Ukraine and for election interference.
I mean, what we've seen recently also is that Trump, is on friendly terms with Putin. So these sanctions, would it mean he is taking a tougher line now, or?
Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the announcement comes from the Department of State. It's been signed off by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. There's been pressure behind the scenes, notably from Republicans, on Donald Trump to take a firmer stance. They've been pushing him to determine whether there is this violation of international law, because that then triggers these automatic sanctions. What we can see is there's certainly a very different stance from, on the one hand, the Department of State, the CIA, Congress, who are taking a very firm stance against Russia, seeing Russia as an adversary, saying this is an attack on the soil of an ally. People were hurt. They suspect that Vladimir Putin is behind activities like this and think that Russia is out there trying to disrupt the global order. And on the other hand, you've got Donald Trump, who apparently seems reluctant to say a word against Vladimir Putin on the Russians, always talking about better relations. That summit in Helsinki recently, which was seen as an embarrassment even by Republicans. So this conciliatory approach, we can say, is still going on, because there's a key ally of Donald Trump, Senator Rand Paul, who's been in Russia this week and has tweeted that he's delivered a letter to the Kremlin, again talking about this conciliatory approach, about improving dialogue and about resuming cultural exchanges, talk of further engagement. It seems that the administration is sort of divided in its attitude to Russia.
Right. Thank you for that analysis. Correspondent Alistair Sanford. So now we've heard the Western perspective, but what about the Russians? What are they saying? Alex is following this side of the story in the Cube. Alex.
Tessa, here at Euronews, we want to bring you all sides and all voices to these stories. And so the other side of this story is the Russian perspective. Let's just bring you up a tweet from a Russian representative to the United Nations saying here, the theatre of the absurd continues. No proofs, no clues, no logic, no presumptions of innocence, just highly likely, saying the one rule, always blame Russia. And then look at this, at the bottom here saying, let us welcome the united sanctions of America. And then look at this word, hashtag Skripal hoax. The language of hoax being used by the Russian representative to the UN. Then let's look at the Russian embassy in America. They put out a dual language statement, Russian and English, on Facebook. Key here to pull out is the fact they've got accustomed to not being presented with any evidence. Let's just pull you up a quote from it as well, in which they describe these sanctions as draconian, based on, quote, far-fetched accusations. Now, it's fair to say that Britain and their allies around the world have come to the conclusion, which they claim is on evidence and intel shared between powers, that Russia was responsible, the most likely culprit for the poisoning. Russia, all the way through, has insisted it's far-fetched, and now they're calling these sanctions, these latest sanctions, draconian in their effect. So that's the official perspective. What about Russian media? Let's just bring you up the TASS news agency. Well, they pick up on that point from the embassy, saying, where's the evidence? Questioning America. What is the evidence upon which you're making this statement? So picking up very much on that side of the Russian argument. Then there's the other Russian media news outlet, Kommersant here, picking up on the line that these sanctions are draconian. Again, quoting the line from the embassy there. So there is a sense that the Russian media are reporting very much the view that these sanctions are based not on concrete evidence against Russia, and that these sanctions are draconian in their effect and how far they reach. What about you? What are you saying on Facebook and Twitter? Let's just bring up a comment from Graham here, who's not convinced by the arguments of America and the West, saying here, this narrative has convinced nobody. He says these sanctions, it's unreal America's doing it. But then on the other side, Greg commenting on our Facebook article on Euronews, saying, well, at least Trump is holding Russia to account. Here, the idea that Russia has been presented as the most likely culprit, and that Western countries, now the United States, is holding them accountable. So what do you think? Do you think Russia is finally being held to account by America, or are you unconvinced by the arguments that have been put into the public domain on this? You can let us know your thoughts using hashtag theCUBE.
All right, thanks for that, Alex. And we will have more on the UK perspective on this story later on with our correspondent in London. Now, firefighters in Portugal are battling to contain wildfires burning in the Algarve region before they reach beach resorts. Scores of people have been evacuated from the area, especially popular with tourists, and 32 have been injured as 1,000 firefighters fight against the intense heat and strong winds. Euronews' Nicholas Wells has this story.
Portugal's Prime Minister has warned that a massive fire burning out of control in the Algarve tourist region will take many days to put out, as the authorities battled near record temperatures. The flames have now spread closer to the coast, and the municipalities of Silves and Portimão. It's an operation that will still take several days. The fire will not be extinguished in the next few hours. The coming hours will be especially difficult because of temperature, wind velocity and relative humidity. The firefighting windows of opportunity are limited and focused on nighttime and dawn. Environmentalists are pointing the finger at eucalyptus trees, a native Australian species that's highly flammable.
You know, we've got to do something about the eucalyptus here. That's the problem. It's like living next door to a can of petrol. You don't want to do that, especially with the possibility of this heat wave turning into something that could be really... I mean, the good news is, thank God, we haven't had any loss of life as yet, but we'll see.
The progress of the fire can be seen from space. Experts say it's already destroyed more than 21,000 hectares. In neighbouring Spain, emergency services tackled a major wildfire in the forest of Luchant, around 80 kilometres south of Valencia. The blaze has already forced the evacuation of some 2,500 people, and the authorities say the situation remains a concern. Nick Wells, Euronews.
And still to come on the program, Argentina decides on a deeply divisive legislation that would legalize abortion for pregnancies up to 14 weeks. And a ship carrying 87 migrants rescued from Libyan waters is due to dock in Spain today. After being blocked from entry into both Italy and Malta, the ship had to wait in international waters for over a week. We'll have more of that after a break. A recap of your top story and Good Morning Europe. Russia sanctions. The U.S. slaps fresh sanctions on Russia over a nerve agent attack against a former double agent, Sergei Skripal, who was living in the U.K. And we have breaking news this morning as Argentina's Senate has voted against legalizing abortion for up to 14 weeks. Now, under current Argentine law, abortion is only permitted in the case of rape or threat to the mother's life. Well, moments after the result, campaigners took to the streets in protests in Buenos Aires. The issue has caused contention across the Catholic country, which was the birthplace of Pope Francis. And for those who opposed abortion, a mass was held at Buenos Aires Cathedral last night. While Catholicism is in decline in Argentina, it is still the dominant religion. 65% of people describe themselves as Catholic. Now, in March, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the Argentine people asking them to prioritize the defense of life and justice. And before the vote, Euronews' Mark Armstrong spoke to women in Argentina on both sides of this contentious debate.
Lorena Fernandez was forced to terminate a pregnancy when she was 16. 7 years later, her now ex-husband wanted her to abort again, but she ran away and had a daughter, Evelyn. At that time, she'd felt trapped, and it seemed as if history was repeating itself. If another person tells you that you have to have an abortion, you let it go. But when it's a family member, it's very painful. It's more painful to know that your mother buried your son in a shoebox in the garden of your house. I ran away from her father, and today, my daughter's 13 years old, and she's my friend. Why do I have to take a life? Why does another person want to decide for me? It's estimated there are 500,000 abortions each year in Argentina, and it's been the #1 cause of maternal death in the country for the past 30 years. Eliana Hansen campaigns for legal, safe and free abortion. Like Lorena, she had a termination at home, accompanied.
Fue como pudo ser, con mucho miedo, con el miedo de
I was very afraid of ending up in a hospital due to a hemorrhage and knowing that I could be denounced. There are women who are much more likely to die in that attempt than others. It seems to me that the most vulnerable are the last ones in the line. While the two agree on the need for more sex education for both young people and parents, there is a great difference that separates them. I deny her an abortion, yes, but I'd open another door to other options, and I believe that's what the state should be discussing now, whether or not adoption should be allowed with the baby still in the womb. It's precisely that, a voluntary interruption of pregnancy. It's done by those who want it, and those who don't want it, don't do it. Mark Armstrong, Euronews.
Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada said yesterday that Canada will always call out international human rights abuses as the Saudi Arabia-Canada spat got worse. Now, the kingdom has now stopped all medical treatment programs in Canada, and they're working on getting Saudi patients out of the country.
We continue to engage diplomatically and politically with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have respect for their importance in the world and recognize that they have made progress on a number of important issues, but we will at the same time continue to speak clearly and firmly on issues of human rights at home and abroad wherever we see the need.
5 defendants accused of abusing children in a filthy compound in New Mexico were in court yesterday. Prosecutors asked for the main suspect to be held without bail and considered a serious risk to society. They say that they have evidence that children were being trained to do school shootings. Loaded guns and shooting ranges were found where the group was living. The Syrian government has announced that Bashar al-Assad's wife, Asma al-Assad, is being treated for breast cancer. She's known for her steadfast support of her husband through Syria's civil war, in spite of intense international criticism. And she is still able to enter the United Kingdom as a citizen there, but a travel ban bars her from the rest of the EU. And still to come for you on the program, a medical school in Tokyo has apologized after changing its results to exclude women. It manipulated results for more than a decade to ensure that more men became doctors. And over in the Cube.
Forest fires are still raging in Portugal. We've got some incredible video to show you of the destruction and also of the aftermath. But first, a quick break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, a ship carrying 87 migrants rescued from international waters is to dock in Spain today after being blocked from entry into both Italy and Malta. It has been a week of waiting for those on board the NGO boat Open Arms after they were rescued from international waters 59 nautical miles north of the coast of Libya. Now, the rescue was the first by an aid group for several weeks as EU countries tussled politically over letting migrant ships in. Well, joining us live from Valencia is Euronews correspondent Annelies Borges. Annelies, what are these 87 migrants? What are they likely to find once they get to Algeciras?
Well, they will find crowded reception centers, people sleeping outdoors in the port area, and some tired workers who have been scrambling to deal with this situation. This surge in the number of people arriving here in Spain has stretched resources, especially in some hotspots in the south of the country. As many as 1,000 people have arrived in Spain in the space of less than 24 hours 2 weeks ago. 2,000 people have arrived on Spanish shores last week alone. And so authorities are trying their best to cope with the situation. In Malaga, for example, they had to convert 3 sports halls into emergency shelters. And in Algeciras, where that Proactiva open arms ship is heading towards, one of the best ports, actually one of the most prepared ports to receive migrants, authorities have had to keep several people on a Spanish Coast Guard ship because they ran out of space on the shelters. And as of Monday, as many as 600 people remained stuck on that port. So what it may sound like chaos really is what the best Spanish authorities can do at the moment to cope with this situation. But for now, at least, people here in Spain are actually dealing with this whole thing quite well. They remain quite tolerant. They say they have a moral duty towards these people in distress, these people that risk everything to cross the Mediterranean. But they also say that this is not Spain's problem, Tessa. This is the EU's problem, and it should be dealt with as such.
And Lise, just very briefly, I mean, this has been going on for a while now. Is there no end in sight in the situation?
Well, the short answer for that, Tessa, is no. With no unified EU policy, unified EU response, there will be no controlling or organizing the flow of people that actually come here to Europe. And according to a new report by Amnesty International, the EU is responsible for this situation and also for the death toll in the Mediterranean. As many as 700 people have perished while attempting that dangerous crossing, and that is despite a significant drop in the number of people attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea.
All right, thank you for that. Annelies Borges reporting there from Valencia. Thanks. Well, as another migrant boat makes landfall in Spain, the German government has agreed with Madrid that it can return migrants who have already applied for asylum in Spain. The deal comes after a political row in Merkel's government when the Interior Minister Horst Seehofer threatened to derail Merkel's leadership over her migrant policy. Well, joining us live from Berlin with more is Euronews' Jessica Salt. Jessica, so what exactly does this deal mean?
Well, the deal struck between the German and Spanish governments means that Germany can now return to Spain asylum seekers arriving at Germany's borders who first applied for asylum in Spain. And this deal is set to come into effect on the 11th of August, and means that asylum seekers will be returned to Spain within 48 hours. We'll get more details on what this deal means and exactly what kind of support Germany has pledged to Spain in return when Angela Merkel herself travels to Andalusia this weekend to meet with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Over 23,000 migrants have already landed on Spanish shores so far this year. And there are concerns in Germany that Germany is as a top destination for many migrants travelling into Europe, that the numbers coming to Germany will increase. In fact, the Interior Ministry is still considering tightening Germany's western borders. A spokesperson for the Conservatives said that this deal struck with Spain is a step in the right direction, saying that asylum seekers shouldn't be able to decide themselves what country they end up living in. The Social Democrats here pointing out that there still needs to be a European response on the redistribution of migrants within Europe.
All right, and Jessica, will this solve the infighting in Merkel's government?
Well, Horst Seehofer was tasked by Angela Merkel of carving out these bilateral deals with Spain, Greece and Italy. So for him, this is a personal success, and this deal struck with Spain, he hopes, will set a precedent, especially, of course, since stricter rules on migration have become very much part of his politics. But whether or not deals with Greece and Italy will be so easy to complete remains to be seen. Of course, with the populist government in Italy, this is expected to be quite difficult. I think Angela Merkel's trip to Spain will be important. The Chancellor really needs to show that as German leader, she's not just being overshadowed by Horst Seehofer at this point, and she's really also taking leadership on the issue of migration. But I think we'll hear Angela Merkel in Spain reiterating the call for a European response. I think in the German government now they realise that bilateral deals such as these between Germany and southern European countries are ultimately probably the more realistic way forward.
All right, thank you for that. Jessica Stultz reporting there in Berlin. Thanks. Now, the Italian government is facing criticism after it voted through legislation meaning parents will no longer have to prove their children are vaccinated. The coalition government, made up of the Five Star Movement and the League, has long been against compulsory vaccination, pledging to overturn the law in the run-up to March elections. Well, with me now is Mark Muska, Technical Officer at the World Health Organization, talking to us from Copenhagen. Thank you for joining us today. Now, can you just give us a broad picture? How have the numbers in terms of measles cases changed over the years?
Well, the numbers had declined until around 2016, and now we're seeing another increase from 2017 and 18, especially this year, 2018. A number of countries, for example, Ukraine and Serbia and Italy and France, have come up with big measles outbreaks, nationwide outbreaks. And this is, of course, of very much concern to the WHO Regional Office for Europe.
Yeah, and what about the implications of this legislation in Italy that we're seeing? What would this mean?
Well, we are very concerned with Italy because the number of measles cases that are being reported over the last years, especially last year, they reported over 5,000 cases. And this year, the first 6 months, we have 2,000 cases reported. And not only that, we also have had 4 people dying of measles and last year, and another 4 people have died this year, including infants and adults. And this is, of course, of great concern for us. It's very important that every country reaches a very high vaccination coverage with 2 doses of the measles-containing vaccine. 2 doses, over 95% coverage in every country and in every district of each country.
And what about this skepticism towards vaccination? Would you say that this is a view or a trend that is increasing?
Well, we are hearing more about it in the last few years. Of course, there's a whole range of people who are hesitating to vaccine. But we have to remember that vaccines have been life-saving, that the vaccines are the most effective public health tool. They are safe and they are effective, and they have prevented thousands and millions of deaths across the globe from vaccine-preventable diseases. So they are a very powerful tool to be used to maintain public health.
All right, thank you for that, Mark Muska, Technical Officer at the World Health Organization. Thanks. And coming up, we will have a lot more for you. We will be live in Australia talking about that extreme drought that is affecting farmers in the country. And also, a Tokyo medical school has apologized for altering the test results so that they can limit the number of women who become doctors. And here, we will talk to the woman who is the last living descendant of Botticelli's muse in The Birth of Venus. But before that, we'll leave you today's no comment from California, where wildfires are still continuing. Officials said it could take until September to put out all the fires. Your top stories on Good Morning Europe. Russia sanctions. The U.S. slaps fresh sanctions on Russia over a nerve agent attack against a former Russian double agent living in the U.K. A third strong earthquake has hit the Indonesian island of Lombok. The tremor has caused the buildings to collapse. Now, still ablaze, wildfires burn across Portugal's Algarve region, dangerously close to top tourist destinations as the country struggles to get them under control. And more breaking news, Argentina's Senate rejects a proposed bill to legalize abortion. Now, Washington has imposed fresh sanctions on Russia over its involvement in the Novichok case, which left a former Russian spy and his daughter hospitalized and fighting for their lives. The move comes just 1 month after the U.S. president met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. And Mr. Trump was criticized for not taking a harder stance during those talks. Well, let's cross over now to London, where correspondent Vincent McAviney can tell us about the UK reaction to this. Vinny, so what has been the reaction from where you are to these sanctions?
Good morning, Tessa. Well, this story broke quite late last night here in the UK, but there has been a really positive reaction from the British government. Diplomats here in the Foreign Office especially, they put out a statement last night saying the UK welcomes this further action by our US allies. The strong international response to the use of a chemical weapon on the streets of Salisbury sends an unequivocal message to Russia that its provocative, reckless behaviour will not go unchallenged. And I think the real message there in the Foreign Office statement is that they do not want this in any way to be normalised. The use of a chemical weapon, thought to be the first time since the First World War, when the Skripals were poisoned, and then Dawn Sturgis and her partner Charlie Rowley some weeks ago. Now, in terms of what happens from here, it was reported earlier in the week that officials here on Whitehall are at the point of almost requesting the extradition of 2 suspects from Russia. This has been a huge investigation involving hundreds of people. It obviously had new lines of inquiry when the second poisoning took place. So we may see in the coming days that request for extradition. But Russia, as we know, very unlikely. It's illegal for them to do that under their constitution, and they'll be very resistant to anything. They have on social media platforms already criticised this statement coming from the United States.
All right, thank you for that. Vincent McAviney reporting there from London. Thank you. Now let's head over to Australia. The worst drought in living memory is sweeping parts of the eastern part of the country, with farmers in some cases culling cattle and sheep that they can no longer afford to keep. Record low levels of rainfall have affected large areas of grazing and cropland. New South Wales, which has just recorded its 5th driest July on record, has been hardest hit. The state accounts for a quarter of Australia's agricultural output. Well, we're joined now from Brisbane by Dan Nolan, reporter at Channel 9 Network in Australia. Thank you for joining us on the program today. How bad is the situation there for farmers?
Well, currently in the state of New South Wales, it's being described as catastrophic by some of those farmers. I mean, these are people who are used to living in droughts. It is part of what happens in a country like Australia, that you have booms and busts, but they are calling what the conditions they're facing there at the moment catastrophic. They've never seen anything like it. There are places that not only don't have enough feed for the animals, but even not enough water. I mean, they've got their dams have all dried up, and you know, they are literally trucking in water, which is those images you're seeing at the moment. That is actually a water truck bringing water in, and you can see, you know, how thirsty all those animals are trying to get a piece of that. So we have had droughts before, but currently in that one state of New South Wales, nearly, I think it is 99% of the state is drought declared. And the biggest problem is that the forecast is also really bad. There is not any great forecast for rain over the next 6 months.
Yeah, and, you know, farmers, they're calling for changes in drought assistance. So what has the government been doing?
Well, the government's provided a package which would be about $500 million US. But what that sort of equates to, it's very complicated how they break it down, but it ends up being around $10,000 US for each farmer, half now and half later. So the reality is that it's really not going to make a whole lot of difference for them. And so they need a lot more assistance. But I mean, more than anything, they're trying to get money to buy feed to keep their animals alive. But what they really need is rain, and that is out of everyone's hands.
All right. And what about, you know, we talked about culling of animals. So can the farmers recover, do you think, from this?
Look, a lot will, some won't. This will end a lot of smaller farmers' time. All of the bad droughts that we have had in the past results in that. And what you will find is that there will probably be a lot of bigger corporations, bigger farmers that will end up taking over the land, and you will sort of lose that quintessential Aussie farmer that lives on the land.
All right, thank you for that. Dan Nolan talking to us from Brisbane, a reporter at Channel 9 Network in Australia. Thank you. And a lot more coming up for you on the program. Who was Botticelli's Venus? It's a question that's intrigued art experts for centuries. But now, 500 years later, we just might have the answer. Join us for that after the break. A recap of your top story, Russia sanctions. The U.S. slaps fresh sanctions on Russia over a nerve agent attack against a former double agent, Sergei Skripal, who was living in the U.K. Now, some breaking news for you from Indonesia this morning. The third earthquake in 2 weeks has just taken place in the island of Lombok. Alex in the Cube has the story. Alex.
Tesa, it's been confirmed by the U.S. Geological Survey that a preliminary 5.9 magnitude earthquake, the third to strike, as Tesa was saying there, within 2 weeks in the same region, has struck Lombok. Now, there are conflicting reports from other geological agencies about the exact strength, but at this stage, preliminary 5.9 from the U.S. Geological Survey. Let's just show you where this has taken place. This is a map from the U.S. Geological Survey showing you on Lombok where they believe the epicenter was of this earthquake. We can actually zoom out a little bit for you here, zooming in there, just to show you the location of this island in relation to Indonesia. Indonesia up here, Lombok down here. So this being the third earthquake within a period of 2 weeks to strike here. We've also got some video, if I can bring that up for you now. This is from a representative of the disaster agency in the country. Let's just show you this latest video from the latest earthquake, showing you, again, the scenes here in Indonesia, a region that's already been so badly battered by the previous earthquakes. You can see here the debris on the ground. This is the scenes after this latest earthquake. Apologies for the slight pause in the video there, but these pictures coming from Indonesia. Another bit of news we had this morning was the death toll from the previous earthquake. We had initial figures suggesting it was in the just over 100, but now the government news agency saying that 347 people, a minimum of 347 people, have been killed. But as you can see just from these videos as well, the scenes there are still developing. There are still teams from the Indonesian Red Cross. They were working, as we were reporting this morning, working on helping people from the last earthquake. Well, now they've got a fresh earthquake to deal with as well. One thing that's important to say about this is that there is no indication yet from the disaster agency in Indonesia, or indeed from the US Geological Survey, that there is a tsunami risk. Because of the location of the islands, relation obviously to the ocean, there was a fear that any additional earthquakes could trigger a tsunami risk. Well, they're saying that this latest earthquake, believed to be 5.9 magnitude, does not carry with it a tsunami risk. But as you can see, a hugely distressing picture, a very troubling third earthquake in just 2 weeks for the island of Lombok. We will stay across this story and bring you the latest as and when we have it.
All right, thank you for that update, Alex, and the Cube team. Now to Japan. A Tokyo medical school has apologized after it emerged that they had been purposefully marking down female candidates. The Tokyo Medical University admitted manipulating entrance exam results since 2006. A legal investigation found that female candidates had been marked down by 20%, with male candidates having 20 points added to their scores. Now, the school have now said it should not have occurred and vowed to prevent it from happening again.
We deeply apologise for having inconvenienced and caused so many people pain with such a serious scandal. Society is changing rapidly and we need to respond to that. Any organisation that fails to utilise women will grow weak and fail to contribute to society.
Joining us now from Tokyo is Jeff Kingston. Jeff, thank you for joining us on the programme. What has been the reaction to this? This has been quite a revelation.
I didn't have anything yet because it's here 1 hour.
I think a lot of female doctors suspected something funny was going on. And, I think in general, the reaction in editorials and op-eds has been one of, people find this appalling. This level of discrimination against women is counterproductive. Prime Minister Abe has said he wants to make Japan a place where women can shine. But if they're not given an opportunity to get into professional schools, how are they going to shine?
Yeah, and this has been happening for decades, so it means that we would assume that there have been a number of candidates affected. Is there any plan to compensate, or in what way will they apologize?
Exactly. All they've done is verbally apologize, but nobody has sort of trotted out a plan of restitution. So what does that involve? Are they going to individually compensate the women that were sidelined? Are they going to set up a scholarship fund for women applicants in the future? Are they going to set targets? I mean, Japan is at the bottom of the OECD in the percentage of female doctors. And their logic is really bizarre, that if we have too many female doctors, that's going to lead to staffing shortages. So we have to limit the number of women. So when they become pregnant and leave their job or take a long leave, this is not going to inconvenience the hospitals. That is, turning things upside down, and a lot of people are really disgusted with this.
Yeah, and does this reflect the general attitude to women?
Well, I mean, Japan ranks right alongside Saudi Arabia in terms of, the percentage of women politicians in the National Assembly, and is below 100. And the wage gender gap here is massive. Women earn on average about 70% of men. So, the discrimination against women is systemic in Japan, is one of the great failings of patriarchy.
All right, thank you for that, Jeff Kingston there, professor at Temple University in Tokyo. Thanks. Well, we have Portugal. The Prime Minister of Portugal said that the fires are continuing in that country, could still burn for days. Well, the Cube team has this part of the story for you.
Well, Tessa, there was just incredible video all over social media showing the destruction as well as the aftermath. Take a look at this video posted by Rudy. He posted this on Twitter. This is just meters away from his home in the area of Algarve. This is just absolutely incredible. Luckily, he was able to escape. Rudy also sent us another video that he took a few days later. This is from his vacation home, his second home, by the way, in Portugal, where you can just see this destruction. We'll play that for you right now. And all of the trees that have been down as a result of this blaze that has been burning since last week, since Friday. We're actually joined now by Rudy live, who is back in the region where you have this home. Hi, Rudy. I'm glad to see that you are safe.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Just tell us about your escape. Just describe that for us.
Yeah, it was... it was my first time I ever experienced this huge kinds of fire. So for me, it was also a new bad experience, of course. The fire was actually a few days ago. It was far away from our home, so we were actually not that afraid of everything. But then on Monday night, the fire just came straight at us, straight to our homes. So the firemen, they just stormed into our house and they said, we need to evacuate, we need to take all our stuff. And we were actually just chilling and just enjoying our holidays. So I actually grabbed all my stuff I think I needed to take, and we jumped in the car with the whole family. And we had to start driving because the fires were chasing us literally like 5 meters behind our backs. So it was dramatic. It was totally chaos. The city was... It was something you cannot describe, actually. It was a nightmare.
Wow, so you were literally just meters away from the fire. And yeah. Portugal has experienced other fires, like the one last year where over 100 people died. But had you personally ever seen anything like this before?
No, not like this. I talked to local police and fire departments, and they also said that this year it's really out of control. It's something they also never seen before.
Yeah. And just the video that we just showed that you shot by your home just outside your garden of all the destruction, to come back now and to see all of that there must be pretty devastating.
It's shock. You know what it is? It's really strange. Now it's 3 or 4 days after the massive burn, and actually, a good thing is that you see the city comes alive again. I mean, the shops are open, but if you look outside and you look to the mountains, you see the enormous damage this fire took to this country. And if you look at that, yeah, it's really unbelievable. Everything around you is gray and full of ash, and the trees, everything is devastated. You can see it on the videos. it's a mess. It really hurts you to see that a country like this has to deal with this kind of situations.
Well, the important thing is that you are safe and everyone is safe. And so thank you so much for your time, Rudy.
No
and thank you for joining us this morning.
Perfect. Thank you too, Cindy.
Thank you. There's a lot of video like this all over social media. We welcome your videos, your photos. If there is anything that you'd like to send us, please use the hashtag #TheCube, and we would love to see that.
All
Tessa.
right. Thanks for that, Cindy and the Cube team. Thanks. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, who was Botticelli's Venus? It's a question that's intrigued art experts for centuries, but now 500 years later, we just might have the answer. Join us after the break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Botticelli's The Birth of Venus is one of the most recognizable works of art in the world. But the inspiration for the face and form of Venus has never been known. Well, that is until now. Euronews' correspondent Claudio Lavanga met Venus's last living descendant.
This is The Birth of Venus by Sandra Botticelli, one of the most famous paintings in the world. And yet, the true identity of the Venus has remained a mystery for more than 500 years. A popular theory in the art world is that the muse, the inspiration behind the painting, was a young Italian beauty and Botticelli's next-door neighbor, Simonetta Cattaneo Vespucci. Simonetta Cattaneo was a noble woman from Genoa who, at 16, married Marco Vespucci, a cousin of Amerigo, the explorer who gave his name to America. Soon after their marriage, they moved to Tuscany. It was in Florence when Botticelli is thought to have met Simonetta. Many believe her beauty bewitched Botticelli in such a way that she will be at the center of many of his paintings. Today, Simonetta and Botticelli's tombs can be found here, in the Church of All Saints in Florence. That's only one of the clues that links the muse to the great painter.
When Simonetta died in 1476, her funeral was held here, and then 34 years later, when Botticelli passed away, he specifically requested to be buried at the feet of his beloved Simonetta, and still today you can see their tombs side by side for eternity.
If Simonetta was really Botticelli's inspiration for his work, that means the essence of the Venus is still alive, embodied within her last living descendant.
My name is Simonetta San Cristoforo Cattaneo, and I'm the last living descendant of the Venus of Botticelli. I found out that I was the last living descendant when I was around 10, and my grandmother, that was called Simonetta Cattaneo as well, gifted to me a big print. She told me she is one of our ancestors, but it's still there, and it means a lot to me. It's like still a connection that I have with my grandmother and, of course, with my past. Botticelli painted The Birth of Venus 10 years after Simonetta's death. So she didn't pose for him. She wasn't like the model, she was a physical there. Because also it would have been a scandal at the time to pose naked for a married woman. But I still believe, still now from experts, that she was actually the subject of the painting because of her beauty.
A mystery that started in Genoa and Florence ends unsolved in London. Here, modern-day Simonetta works in an art gallery. Her claim that her ancestor and namesake was the inspiration behind the Venus is credible, but impossible to verify. What is unquestionable is the way the Venus has shaped and informed her life, and made her a lover of the arts.
It's interesting, even after so many years, the image of the Venus is still everywhere. Artists also represented her. Even Andy Warhol made a series of portraits of the Venus. You can see on Instagram celebrities and stars post images of themselves, like on the same pose like she was doing. So it's very fascinating to me. It's very interesting the way that she's still, after so many centuries, she's still an icon of beauty and femininity.
That was a report by Claudio Lavanga there. Thank you for joining us today on Good Morning Europe. And do stay with Euronews for all of your top stories. And we'll leave you with today's No Comment from Switzerland, where a mudslide was triggered by heavy storms in Chamasson. Although cars and houses were covered in mud, nobody was injured.